Hello, thanks for joining me today. My name is Thomas Johnson. I'm the Curator of Performance and Moving Image at Dunlop Art Gallery and the RPL Film Theatre. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm located on Oksana Kasataki, also known as Pile of Bones, also known as Regina, located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional territory of the Nehiyawak, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion of S.P.A.N.E, a screening of performance art in the natural environment. S.P.A.N.E is the vision of Johannes Zits and has been presented in a number of venues internationally since 2011. This 2021 edition is presented in 4 parts, each in response to a particular element. Subsequent screenings and discussions will take place throughout the year, and for this 3rd iteration, we'll have a discussion on the theme of air with Johannes and artists Johanna Bunden and Didier Morelli. I welcome all our viewers to contribute to this dialogue via the chat to the right of the screen, and we'll have the opportunity to bring questions up towards the end. I also encourage you, if you haven't yet, to spend some time with the works curated by Johannes, which are accessible for free thanks to our partners at Vukavu. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Toronto-based artist Johannes Zits' multidisciplinary practice focuses on the many meanings engendered by a body, both human and non-human, and extending the notion of the performer to include nature itself. Since graduating from York University in 1984, Zits has presented work across Canada and internationally, including performances for the 8th Encuentro, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Le Festival International du Film de Zagarite, Montreal, and performance variations on The Island. Sorry, Johannes has a very extensive bio, and I'm going to move quickly for brevity. He was the 2020 Artist in Residence at Western University's McIntosh Gallery, London, Ontario, where he presented the exhibition Listening to Trees and realized the 20-minute video Checking In on an Old Copper Beech, and much more. Johanna Bunden is an independent artist whose practices include dance and theatre. She is a 2005 graduate of Les Ateliers de Danse Moderne de Montreal, a 2008 graduate of the Globe Theatre's Actor Conservatory, and holds a BA in Arts and Culture from the University of Regina. Currently, Johanna is an artistic associate of Curtain Raisers. She is the co-creator of Curtain Raisers' production of Live Duet, 2016, Movable Feast Independent Arts Edition in 2016, Assistant Director on Bad Blood, 2017, and producer and lead artist for Trespassers Waltz, September 2020. As a choreographer, New Dance Horizons, Globe Theatre's Sandbox Series, the National Arts Center's Prairie Scene Festival, and the Prairie Dance Circuit have presented her work. And finally, born and raised in Montreal, Didier Morelli is an interdisciplinary artist who combines practice and research in both his academic and performative explorations. Morelli is a PhD candidate in the Department of Performance Studies at Northwestern University in Chicago, Illinois. His live art practice includes endurance-based, contextually specific, and relational actions. His studio-based work, which incorporates elements of installation, drawing, photography, and video, has been shown in solo exhibitions, Catherine Mulheron Gallery, Toronto, the Defibrillator Performance Art Gallery, Chicago, and sightings at Leonard and Bina Ellen Art Gallery, Montreal, as well as in group exhibitions, the Odeon Gallery, and he has performed at 7A11D Festival of Performance Art, the Buenos Aires Performance Art Biennial, and the Viva Action Montreal. His dissertation focuses on the relationship between the built environment and the kinesthetic nature of performing bodies in everyday outdoor architectural spaces. His writing has been published in Canadian Theatre Review, C Magazine, and S Art and Opinions. And now it's my pleasure to let Johannes and Johanna and Didier continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you all for being here. I just want to say I'm an immigrant from the Netherlands who has settled in this place now called Toronto. This is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississauga, the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. This is also now home to many diverse First Nations, the Inuit and the Métis, I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're going to be talking hopefully about the 6 videos that were featured on this program, all dealing with the idea of air, and that's how I've sort of pulled it together. Air is a very ephemeral thing, substance for any artist to deal with, and yeah, do you guys? It's up to you guys now. DJ, Johanna.
I feel very at home with this element, and I think of all the elements, I think I'm probably the most at home in this element. How would I say that? And
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Since I'm in Montreal, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm located in an unceded Indigenous land. The Kenyan Kahaka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which I am based. Jojage, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, including the Kanyenake Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe. And today it is home to diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. And yes, I'd like to also say that I think air is something that I'm at home at, but as I told Johannes when he first invited me to the air panel, air section of Spain, Spain. Yes, I don't know why I had a momentary lapse there. I feel like a lot of the air, earth, water, and fire elements intermingle with each other in a lot of these videos and a lot of the work that I end up making. And so it feels like, and having watched the whole programming now, it's sometimes hard to distinguish in these where air begins and earth continues, or water starts to emerge. I think that although I think we'll stay around air, I think it's important to acknowledge that there's really.
I think we'll find all those links as we're going through the different videos. The first video that I'd like to start with is Erika de Freitas video. Yes, thank you for putting that there. I first wanted to mention about the title of the piece, which Erika has mentioned is a combination of different elements, but the last section, recitation and emigration, is coming from a Gertrude Stein poem that she wrote, and she sort of has put various different things together to arrive at that title. And it's not to define the piece, but it's sort of leaving it open as to how you might interpret the piece itself. Next slide. One of the things that we had talked about, Erika and I, was the meaning of the piece and what is happening in that piece. And as she was about to go into the discussion of the video, I sort of stopped her and said, please don't explain what's happening there, because of the mystery of her trying to capture this little fleck of light that is going into the space that she's working in. And it's a very shallow space, and you're not quite sure where that light source is coming from, but it's just like the magic of fireflies or the crystals going through a prism. The magic is more where it's projecting on than the light source itself. We talked a little bit about that this piece originated from an invitation from the AKA Gallery in Saskatoon, and it was sort of as a response to the pandemic and just being at home and exploring, working through process and trying very different things. And it was also about being, it was called, oh, sorry, I forgot to write down the title of the program at AKA. Yeah. It's about searching and seeking and the act of trying to capture something that is so ephemeral. And that's the one word that I want to keep coming back to as we discuss. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, the different positions of the hand is what I was so fascinated by, and the different play with the hands as it's moving back and forth closer to the camera, and just that very shallow space. Next slide. Where is that light? How to hold on to it? Can it be held on to? And where is that light source? Is it coming from a flashlight? Is it coming from the sun itself? Is it going through a beam? Is it being projected? Those are just the mystery and the beauty of the video itself. Erika also had another video that she did around the same time where she was working performance artist work and play with the light coming into her mouth and trying to capture, trying to swallow that light. And it was beautifully, beautiful complementary to this piece as well. Next slide. Just the light on that edge of that image. Next slide. Do we want to go to the next one? Renya?
Sure.
Johanna?
Sure. So
Ranya Al-Harthi, is my sound okay? Ranya Al-Harthi shared a work called Zagarite, and this was part of a larger piece called Trespassers Walk that Thomas mentioned. Curtain raisers received a gift from heaven, you know, a bunch of money to perform a site-specific work from the National Arts Center to perform a site-specific work, and we chose a venue called White Butte. So this is on Treaty 4 land, about 20-30 minutes outside of Regina. Next slide, please. So this is Ranya. She's holding some, we spoke yesterday, we discerned that it was sage, though we're not sure what kind of type of sage, which is so prevalent here on the prairies. And she's kneeling low to the land. This was during a preparatory rehearsal the day before. She's familiarizing herself with the site. The expanse of land was spread out over a couple of kilometers. So there was 52 artists on the land over a very large expanse. And Ranya's wearing a shawl. She shared with us that this is a shawl that she got while she was living in Jordan. This was sort of a preparation, I'd say. Next slide, please. Do you want me to say that, Johannes, or you? Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. This was so beautiful in the film. If you've seen it, there's a rhythm that Ranya uses also in preparation. It's kind of felt as if she inhabits a sort of rhythm, tapping it on her heart in diagonal, her heart towards her right thigh. And I would need Ranya to speak a bit more about this, but I know she has extensive study and practice internationally, and she referred to some Javanese peers who use this in preparation for voice work. Next slide, please. This is the shawl, which almost presents as a character in the piece that's cast in a little bluff of bushes. You can see the event happened in September, so the prairies are just on fire with color here. In this little, you know, brush of trees. And Ranya's shawl is cast also in diagonal here. It's quite a vibrant green. Next slide, please. throughout the performance, Rania was tending or attending to a small kind of plant, understood it to be an altar of sorts. And here she had penned some words, some names, and then skewered them with the branches of a tree. These are the names that are requested from audience members for her to call. Next slide, please. So this is Rania in an interaction with an audience member. So the audience experience was such that they were wandering, walking for maybe an hour or more, and they would happen upon Rania here, and Rania offered them this ritual to deliver a message into the air through a cry. Next slide, please. And this is the performance action, which I understand to be Zagarite. A Palestinian, a cry into the air, and the delivery of a name, of a message. And this was really resounding, like through the whole site. You could hear it at a great distance. And we spoke yesterday, and my experience of the cry was like kind of mournful, but there was also something very playful, very, very quick, high, fast vibration in Rania's call. Next slide, please. And then this is the kind of landing or settling, the resonance of the action. Rania, this performance piece had an element of endurance to it. I think Rania did it for over 2 hours. She mentioned she did the call about 35 times, 35 different exchanges with audience members. And I think I appreciate the way she's let it kind of wash through her.
I included this slide because it really it shows how that it was heavy, that she needed a pause between each of the performances. There was a resting moment, that because it was so intense, the experience that she went through is what she reflected on yesterday.
Yeah, I agree. There was before there was like a sending out. What I witnessed was a real taking it in. Yeah.
And she also mentions speaking to those that are away or that have passed away, that she's sending this message out into the air, which why I really love this piece and included it in the performance.
Yeah, I really appreciated the ritual that she offered the audience members through this, and I think it was very surprising and unexpected for folks to happen upon this kind of a ritual.
Next, we want to go to Jeremiah.
So yeah, Jeremiah Barber is based in San Francisco. And this video, Portrait of My Father Illuminated by Pounding Dry Ground, is what he described in our conversation as an early work. I think he sort of said that it was rudimentary in a way, kind of in the way that those early performances that you make can be naive and kind of like playful and full of unexpected. And I think that's something that really drew me to it from the very beginning. So the framing of the performance is quite basic. It's a camera on a tripod recording a single action. There's no change of position. There's no change of perspective, no change of view. You really have one set angle. And the action is quite basic. It's Jeremiah pounding the earth with his hands going up and down, nonstop, and creating a cloud of dust. And what the cloud of dust does is that it creates an accumulation, and it captures the light off of a projection. So here we can see Jeremiah at the beginning of the performance, where we can sort of see that there's a projected light in this dark field that's capturing his body. And in the background, there's a little bit of an image, and you can see his hands there being thrown up in the air as he makes this repetitive gesture where he taps the ground. The video is 6 minutes. It's quite short. And it actually takes some time for you as the viewer to realize what's happening, what is he doing, because the image doesn't materialize right away. It takes a while for the dust to accumulate in the air and to kind of agglomerate. And so here we have an instance where the image of Jeremiah's father becomes crisp and becomes visible for once. It's kind of like this amazing ghost image that's constantly fleeting and drifting in and out of the screen. And so the thing that happens actually with the type of projection to Jeremiah, of course, we were talking and I said, oh, it's great. I've always wanted to bring a projector out into a field and do video. And he's like, oh no, this is a slide projector. So there was also this like quality to the slide projection, which is grainy. And you can actually hear it whirring in the background, as well as Jeremiah making this exhausted noise and hitting the ground and kind of letting go of the scream every time he pounds the ground. But what it also does is it creates this weird sense of depth. So the light starts capturing on different levels of particles that are captured in the air. So you end up with this immediate figure of the father, but then also this background figure, and it also catches on what seems to be a tree or some kind of landmark in the back. So it's constantly moving forward, backwards, coming out as pieces, coming out as a whole. There's also Jeremiah's partner at the time is there taking photographs. So there, again, to go along with this kind of like very rudimentary DIY, naive first performance idea, you have the kind of like person who's been dragged out, the partner who's been dragged out in the middle of the field to document this work and who's kind of like out there with you as you're trying to figure out how it works. There's something very, again, like raw, something very non-staged about it that I think is quite beautiful, and quite like sincere. And Jeremiah and I had a lot of fun talking about being a young performance artist or a new performance artist, and having something like throwing oneself into something like this and not knowing what would materialize and being so surprised and blown away by the result, which in this case is this airy, ghosty figure that keeps appearing and disappearing. So here you have an example of how the image gets stretched out, it gets distorted, the father becomes sort of fragmented, and the way the performance ends is, so you see Jeremiah throwing his hands up and down and his hands sort of appear in the light, and then he ends at this sort of climax point where the full image is there because there's so much accumulation, and the father figure is just clearly depicted up in the sky, and then he walks away, and slowly, since he's no longer there, the cloud sort of breaks away, and we go back to this incredibly sort of powerful dark depth of the night, with the projector still going on in the background. So there's this really nice very straightforward single person camera action to the work that I thought was quite beautiful. And in relationship to air, it really brings out this tangible quality of air, making air visible, that I told Johannes and Jeremy this first one after I saw the video and we talked. I said, I just was so blown away by your use of image. I just thought, oh, I wish I'd come up with this. It was just like this total want, this total like, this is so genius. It's so brilliant. It's so beautiful. It's such an amazing thing to play with. I want to go play with air and sand particles in this way. It just seemed really fertile and full of potential.
The wind was also so beautiful.
Yeah, the wind blowing in and out and creating a kind of movement. And just in relationship, so Jeremiah's father is a dairy farmer in Oklahoma. And so Jeremiah talked about this sort of relationship to land and to labor, and this sort of homage, or at least proximity to tilling the land, to working the land, and the figure of the father being in proximity to that. So yeah, it's quite great.
Next, we wanted to talk about Carole Fuglem's piece. Word's sake on the life of their own. This particular version that's on the screen, next slide, is the second version that she did. The original version, as you can see here, is 3x4. Next slide. She did a second version of it to get a higher resolution image. The original version is different than the first in that she's actually one of the performers in the first version. And what you see is two people talking and their breath being captured by the light in very cold weather. The two performers are on either side of the frame. And for the first iteration of it, it was Carole and a friend had helped Carole set up, Paul Litherland helped set up the image. And for the second one, it was a couple who knew each other quite intimately, and they were telling jokes the whole time. And so these sudden bursts that you're getting are of them laughing, and not having the audio there creates a tension that you don't know. If you knew that they were talking, you don't know what is being said. And what's also so lovely about this is that at times there's nothing there, and is nothing nothing? Is the air in between those breaths, is that any different than the breath itself? I also wanted to say that for this particular video, originally it was part of an installation which Carole projected this video onto a piece of silk that also floated in the space and was captured by the wind itself. So yeah, I know that Johannes saw this piece on a screen, and I'm just curious what that experience was like, because it is quite long.
Yeah, I saw it on the big screen, and the thoughts that came to mind was it was like watching like a very ethical fireworks show. Like it was like this very, very kind of wholesome state of like awe, the same as I might experience if I was watching fireworks, you know, and just kind of like it staring up at the sky. It was quite mesmerizing. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And the rhythms, like you know, there is an element of length, but the rhythmic dimension to the speech, to the conversation, I think there's an arc there that like I felt myself hook onto and connect with.
There were also little particles of dust or snow that were flying, and almost anything that happened on the screen, you were saying, "Oh, good, something happened."
Yeah, very like heightened state of awareness. It really brought on like a really heightened state of awareness.
And that's something that performance provides. You know, that staying with it and going through, watching what happens, anticipating something. I included this image because you can see just a hint of somebody's jacket in the bottom left-hand corner. But it happens so rarely in the piece that it's really, you can't figure it out what's going on. Yeah. Next slide. And now, yeah, I wanted to turn to Johanna. Do you want to talk about your piece?
Sure. Yeah. So this is occurrence. I'd say this is a first approximation. Didier, you mentioned sort of a first performance project, so you can't say it's my first one, but it's my first one in this way. And my partner was just out of frame doing some filming for me, you know, while we had childcare for an hour. So there's like a freshness and a rawness to this as well that I'd like to lean into. So this is a row down. Ian Campbell did some editing for me, and this is actually footage that Ian enhanced it with around, but it's footage from the area of White Butte. So again, back on Treaty 4 land, and yeah, this is a very familiar scape here on the prairies. Next slide, please. So I have a score that I've improvised with quite often, just a blindfolded score that I've used to explore movement and text. And most recently, I've been exploring it in relationship to a radio. So tuning a radio blind and tuning into either radio, like audio works that I've created, or creating a sort of pirate radio situation where we have a transmitter and we're for doing that. That's with my collaborator Lee Henderson and Jaden Pfeiffer. And so I transposed this radio work into a little bluff of trees at White Butte. And that's my grandma Jean's, a little stool that's been around my family's home for a while. And that's a radio from my mamere, from my grandma, my other grandma. Next slide, please. And again, this is around September the 20th, kind of like around the equinox there. And the situation is kind of simple. It's like tune a radio. But I did a little cheat. I'm not tuning. The sound wasn't great. So I did add some other sound on top. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the sound that becomes present is a radio piece that I made for Trespassers Waltz, which is, it was a series of interviews with 10 artists that's speaking to them about their relationship to land, and specifically about, I'd say the primary prompt is around what makes you well equipped to work with land. Next slide, please. And the voices that are heard are the voices of settler artists who are sitting with this inquiry. What makes you, well equipped to work with land? A kind of a prominent voice that comes up is Elizabeth Curry, my friend. She's an amazing artist and musician, and she is talking about stewarding land, stewardship of land, how to be with land without asking anything of it and without changing anything. Another question that comes up is the voice of Chris Alvarez, a performance theater artist here. And she asked this question: what does it mean to trespass? Which is kind of the essential question behind this project, Trespassers Waltz, as we consider perpetual trespassing here. And I think this particular moment, you can sort of see like a heightened state of listening or something, maybe some awareness of different, how listening, I think I'm trying to listen into these questions. Next slide, please. And well, this is the magic of film, right? Because the voices continue after I leave. I sort of animate the object and then leave the object, and then the voices continue to resonate. And in my imagination, this character and her blindness, sort of this like playing with this kind of blind. There's lots of characters. Prophet, feeling she sort of continues on her way across the prairie, just kind of perpetually leaves the situation, and the radio continues to ask these questions and listen to the land a bit. Next slide, please. This is a nice feeling here, just eyes closed or eyes covered and feeling the bark, and it's a very sensation-rich experience. Next slide.
You really hear the sound of as you're walking through the landscape. It was so heightened, and it also makes me reflect on the fact that you do have a blindfold on, that the sound is the all-important element. What you're hearing, what's coming through the airwaves.
Yeah, there's a real dryness this year too. I mean, everywhere, right? But the dryness of the prairie at this time, it's like, that light casting through, it really did feel like something could catch fire any moment. Like, and I was enjoying that game between the static and the dryness. Yeah.
And I also really loved all the solar flares that were coming in from the particular angle that you caught it. It was just like, sort of like Erika's video, the magic of light passing through or being caught at this particular time of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, and at this particular time of the year here, it's just, it's really special. Yeah. Thank you.
Next, do you want to say something about your video, Didier?
Yeah, sure. So my video was, as the world turns, there it is, was created during a residency at Acre Artist Residency, which is a space based out of Chicago that runs a residency every summer out in Steuben, Wisconsin. And they have multiple sessions, and it's very much a sort of compound space with up to like 3 dozens of artists. And then the whole space is run by volunteers from the Chicago arts community. So the cooking staff, the maintenance staff, the people working workshops are all people who give up their time to be there at the same time. So you end up with a community of about 50 or 60 artists, 20 of them young and emerging in residency in the middle of Steuben, Wisconsin, which is Midwest, middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. And so during this residency, I spent 2 weeks. We were before, and Johanna, your piece, we were tuning the radio. I was tuning the earth, or at least trying to tune the earth. And so the work started out of this sort of relative isolation in this compound and trying to figure out ways to go on these like peripatetic journeys or these walks outside of the space to create a performance work. And so I started dragging this rod of wood, this long dowel that had been given to me by my father, in order to kind of like a record player record the sound of the earth as I walked. And so I did a series of walks that were 8 hours about in length, where I would just drag it and use a microphone to record that sound. Throughout those walks, I documented video, sound, images, still images of myself doing things like laying down in the middle of the highway, trying to listen to the earth rotate on its own axis. As I was doing the project, I became fascinated with this idea that the earth had a sound, that it was revolving at a certain frequency that was creating a certain type of megahertz. And so I tried to discern what that noise was, if I could hear it in these different locations that I was in. And sure enough, the sound that became more repetitive, though, was the sound of cars pushing by and coming by. So that's another kind of acoustic element that is really present. We can probably change the slide now, go into what's going on inside. One of the elements that I picked up is the great thing at the Steuben residency is that artists and everyone would just bring books, and they made a huge library of hundreds and hundreds of books that were just brought there for the summer. And so I would pack up my bag with like dozens of these books and go on walks with them, because they were weird. They were like people's cast off books. So the one that comes up a lot, we were talking about this morning, Johanna, was the Russian Constructivist book that I carried with me obsessively because I thought it was funny. This sort of like outdated Russian Constructivist manual that I would carry, and then I would put it on the ground and I would proceed to try to talk through it. So this opening image of the video is actually my mouth moving back and forth, and the video has been put backwards so that my counting down is actually like this weird language. And it looks like some orifice, like an anus or an armpit, but really it's just my mouth blowing on a copy of Art Forum, Christo and Jean-Claude monograph, and the Russian Constructivism book on top of each other. So this is like a reoccurring gesture that comes on throughout the performances. And so the final video that you get has, as you can tell, this like very saturated 90s music video DIY aesthetic. And I think that's both a product of my de-skilled not knowing how to actually edit video and doing it my way, and then in a combination with being raised in the 1990s with high saturation, heavy cut music video culture, and loving this kind of type of like jarring, rough cut, bright, edited sequence. So there's a kind of like a mix of a DIY approach to video editing and the kind of roughness to the video that I think also translates into the performances. One of the things that I did during this...
I love the fact that you've included your own self in this one particular shot. I included that one there because the camera work, that's really reflective of the DIY.
Yes, I mean, I'm carrying the camera. You can hear it actually the beginning. I think at the beginning of the video, you can hear it click, which is the sound that my camera makes when it comes on. So you can hear it coming onto the camera. I really played with all the noises that I was captioning. But one of the things that I was doing in the residency is I learned how to silkscreen. And I started making these very basic silkscreen of myself holding the letters AUDIO on the stick to create the word audio. And I made a series of postcards, silkscreen postcards. And so I think the aesthetic was also really informed by these silkscreen cutout figures of myself laying down in multiple fields or on pavement, on highways, holding these sticks that spelled out audio that I was also using to rub the earth to create this friction. So the silkscreen became a performative medium, even though I was sort of very invested in making a pretty object. It ended up getting reintroduced into the kind of video segment. So yeah, this is the pavement and the letter D on my D walk. We can go to the next slide, do some more description. There was some entering of text, of course, audio being an important aspect, some post-production going there. You can see the sort of t-shirt that I was wearing and the stick bending under the pressure of being dragged behind me. The dowel, the stick, is a performance that my dad did, used on a street in Montreal, on Ontario Street, which is a street he was raised on, and he would whittle the end of the sticks, starting with a length and walking the length of Ontario, and whittle the length of the sticks and measure the length of Ontario with the stick as it reduced in size. And so instead of whittling the length of the stick, I just pounded it and like scraped it until it was unexistent. So that's how I reappropriated my dad's object. And here's a video of me literally laying down in the middle of the highway. And in this segment, actually, I played a little bit with the sound because you hear the car arriving and you think, oh my God, he's going to get run over. But then the car runs by, so I've delayed the sound on it. And you can see me laying down, listening to the earth through the Russian constructivists, the Christo and the art form. The landscapes, it's funny, in looking at Johanna, your video, the landscapes remind me so much of your landscapes, except for their, like, I could see the kind of like similar birch tree, Midwest, like proximity to the Canadian border type of very green, yeah, that part of the continent, that part of Turtle Island. We can go to the next one. I don't know if that's the last one. Oh, there's the Russian constructivism. There's a close-up of the Russian constructivism in black.
You're really playing around with the different colors and the editing, the black and white, and the cutting and the sound. Yeah.
There's a lot of playing around with that. I see in the comments that Ed has commented that it's very lush and painterly, and yes, there's definitely an attention to color. I think the Russian constructivist sort of primary color block cube sort of entered into this kind of like thinking through of this use of color, this use of saturation, this use of sound as a color also, and air. I guess I didn't even really talk about air in all of this, but we can get back to that in the conversation.
Audio is air.
Audio is
sound.
Air, exactly.
And at one point you even make waves on the ground, and I was unsure if that was like a heartbeat sound that you were writing down, or was it air waves?
I think it's more, yeah, I think it was the waves of drawing the waves of the sound, yeah, the sound waves, which are air, which are riding on, yes.
There you go.
Yeah. I totally appreciated the perpetual motion of it. It's just non-stop forward movement in this way that,
I think it was relentless. I had a running injury and I couldn't run, so I just walked instead. And I know that I became, to everyone in the residency, the like lunatic person who's just like disappeared for 8 hours a day with his bag full of art books and his camera. And so there is a relentless energy because I was relentless in it. And so I'm glad that translates. It was pretty intense.
Yeah, I felt like that was a real character in it. That sort of neuroses or like this perpetual motion.
Yeah, the forest that you're in your video makes me think at some point I entered a forest in one of those walks, and it was birch trees, and something fell from the sky onto me, and it was a wild turkey. And I got attacked by wild turkeys in the middle of one of these like daily actions. And so when I saw your video, I thought, oh my God, it's so scary. It's like when the wild turkeys attacked me in the middle of the performance. They came down from the sky through the air.
Oh, I'm sorry you didn't get that part on film. That would have
been No, I was busy running for my life from the wild turkeys.
Sorry. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. The one thing is, there's a really interesting contrast between this video and Jeremiah's video, for example, which is just one take, and it's there, you know. And in, Johanna, you didn't spend a lot of time with the video of your piece either, but it's the layering and how a performance is documented, is something that I found quite interesting between all the different the different videos that are here and how they've been established. Yeah, and also the one thing I also wanted to talk about is ephemerality and performance being or can be something that is seen live or not seen live, and what we're presenting here are documents of something that are happened over time and happened in different places, but now we're experiencing them in one way. I find that quite interesting.
I was just going to say the documentation, and I hadn't read. There was a comment in the comment section asking about process and making the videos on my end. I started making videos, and this is why when Jeremiah and I were talking, I started making videos in a very specific way, where I would drop the camera, make a performance, and then edit that video. Basically not edit, just put it back into the world as the way that I had created it, creating performance for the camera. And over time in my career, I ended up being oversaturated with videos from performances and images from performances from festivals, where everything just started to feel a little staticky. So I started consciously always making performance, even when it was in the context of a festival or something else, with the idea that all of the raw material would then end up being reworked and rehashed into something different. So performance is always a raw phase of something that will then or can then become transformed into other matter, whether through a process of editing or drawing or reprinting and collaging. So to answer that question, it's always, at some point it became conscious, and it always became intentional, that it would go through some kind of processing to then actually end up being recycled in other performances or other works down the line, because the vocabulary and the images are just always cycling through as a kind of continuous, nonstop.
But even still, what we do see in this video is representative of time. We see that you've been to those places a lot, and have been in, that it's been revisited, and that's a beautiful way of accomplishing that. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Johanna about the working with the radio, because this is something that I find so beautiful and so fascinating, and I was wondering if you could talk more about like how that's evolved as a kind of practice, as a way to choreograph or move in space or be in different spaces.
Yeah, I feel still quite young in that exploration, but I'm kind of curious about it as like as a nervous system, like as a sort of tool to consider the nervous system, and I mean it sort of like had new relevance last year. Everyone was doing radio work here. I developed this relationship with like the community radio station, and it was like the hottest venue in town was like the community radio station, right? Because it just had this kind of urgency to it. And for me, it's a very nostalgic thing. Like I grew up in like a home where the radio was like always on and always on in the kitchen. And I also have this, it's not my memory, but like a feeling that like it was a really important part of like prairie experience here for folks who are like in, there's such an element of isolation here, and people who are living in a rural context, living at such great distances to one another, and it being this great connectivity. And I'm recently, like the reason why I used my grandma's stool was I'm kind of interested in like the female narratives around that, around women in great isolation in their homes on the prairie in these rural settings, and having this object that's just like so important for connectivity.
We sort of forget that the internet is not widely available even in the prairies, you know, like it's still a hard thing to get clear internet there. And then the contrast between the radio and the internet are like worlds apart, and yet there is a connectivity there.
Yeah, like that's not my experience of Saskatchewan, but like certainly in the north, or like in the north, people would really be living can be living in a lot of isolation. So that's where I'm kind of researching it from kind of a personal narrative, or sort of imagined narrative. Yeah, and so interesting that, you know, we both like brought our families into it. I brought some matriarchs in, you brought some patriarchs in.
Yeah, this is
how this happens. How does it happen? It's just like
it's in the air.
Yeah, it's in the air. It is. Yeah.
That's another thing I wanted to get into. That what is in the air? People are talking about what's in the zeitgeist. You know.
Well, but I think I mean, it's not only the air, but I think there's a. And Johanna, you were talking about this, about trespassing and having a relationship to the land, and what is it to be a settler. I think that thinking about like lineage and family and genealogy and filiation, I think the things like land, water, air, like often can evoke that kind of like connection to like a material past, a kind of embodied material past that is passed on from generation to generation. And so I definitely, in my project as a whole, my like work project, have biographical elements that are related to my father through art, but I think that things like working through air, working through land, often brings those out in the thinking about material traces and how they continue to live on and echo, like whether it's a table or the air that we breathe or the land that we have settled on and continue to trespass on. I think that there's a connecting tissue there that's really that draws on that.
Yeah. Rania also spoke about like matrilineal aspect to Zagarite, and when it was used in spaces to call, and there being that you know, in that piece, that there's sort of like, my understanding of it was like a connection to lineage through this call, through names. And I don't know, Rania, if you're still there, if you have anything else you want to add in the comments. So I was at the edges of my understanding about this, but I was I felt like it was really important.
And it was sort of a communication between the different women, and that they would play with it, that they would be calling one another through that method.
Yeah, Jeremiah had a piece that isn't part of the programming, but that I think, Johannes, you were trying to decide if it should be, which was a more contemporary piece where he's been calling, or so he lives in San Francisco, and there are these foghorns, and whenever these foghorns create this call in San Francisco, Jeremiah runs to the like nearest edge of the water and calls back out to them. And it's a really, I encourage everyone to track down a copy of this video or the samples, because it's multiple iterations over many years. I think he's been doing it since 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And there's something really beautiful about the different locations he finds himself in, calling out, singing out to the foghorn at different locations. But I think that there's from what we're talking about here, there's a very clear communication, like air serves as a vessel of communication. And here's Jeremiah like running out, calling out to the foghorn, this like antiquated, ancient system that he describes as not really like fully functional in San Francisco, and only like there's kind of like defunct buildings that do it. But I think that in thinking back to that kind of like speaking to an older time, we're speaking to a past, we're speaking to the air, like throwing a message out in a bottle. That video really speaks to that kind of like gesture of, releasing something into the ether and hoping someone will capture it at some other point and return it. I think there's something there too.
And the other thing that I was thinking about too is the space between two things something, and is it air? Is that space? Is that something? And can that be captured? Can we work with that? And I was also thinking, DJ, of another video that you did with gravity, of pulling. What is that force that is pulling a rock down to the ground? What is that? How can we conceive that? I know it's there, but how does it react to us? Is it the Earth spinning, which I think is a totally logical follow-up to gravity?
Yeah, how to get at these like invisible principles or understand these invisible and like potent things.
Yeah, and I think performance, like activating a performance through voice, through sound, through touch, through light, like as we see in the different videos, those are the ways that we represent, or we look to represent those things by giving them body. And that body can be a light body, it can be a physical body, it can be a sound body, it can be like an acoustic body. Like I think we've talked about that kind of like air becoming visible through these different manifestations where the body intervenes to or like gently or like abruptly intervenes in order to make it manifest itself.
Like I'm noticing Rania added like the way that voice does that amplification. She said names to 4 to 5 syllables. So ideas made into, or thought made into syllable, mothers to grandmothers, daughters to mothers to grandmothers. Thank you.
I'm sort of saying, anything else?
I'll just jump in. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, there's still time to add to the chat. But otherwise, I just want to thank you for such a wonderful conversation, and enjoyed seeing the work through your interpretations. And I encourage anyone, if they haven't yet, again, to see it. I've included in the chat the link to Vukavu, S.P.A.N.E, which you can see the videos for free until the 21st of December, I think, which will then be followed by the fourth and final iteration of Spain, which will be fire, and will be coinciding with the winter equinox. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for taking part, and to Johanna and Johannes and DJ and everyone here. Thanks very much, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.